Principia Theologica, Lecture 9, the Theodicy. Hi, Sol Soler here with Lecture 9 in Principia Theologica, and in this lecture we're going to talk about what is known as the Theodicy. So that's an ancient Greek word. It comes from the two ancient Greek words. One is theos, which means God. So that's where we also get the word theology, which is the study of God. So theos, God, and dikos or dikos, which is the ancient Greek word for justice, dikos in ancient Greek, justice. So Theodicy means God. The Theodicy means God, justice, and this is a philosophical and theological question, one of the most important questions in theology. How can we believe that a benevolent, caring, immensely intelligent God exists when life is so bad a lot of the time, and in so many places and for so many people, and when there exists so much suffering? How do we reconcile all this suffering, all this pain, with the existence of a benevolent, intelligent, caring God? And this is a big issue for believing in God, because you want to feel the comfort of believing in God, the security of believing in God, but then you look at the world around you, surrounding you, and there's so much crime and corruption and poverty and greed, and it's awful. And, humans behave in such ugly ways a lot of the time, especially when you are interacting with them online. Okay. So, coming to understand the Theodicy, defending God, showing that a good God can exist, and that this is all this suffering is actually, there's a reasonable way of looking at it, believe it or not. Once you understand that reasonable way of looking at it, it helps you find God more plausible, help you believe in God more, and help you deal with all this suffering in a more secure and rational way. Okay, so I consider this, the lectures that follow after lectures 7 and 8. I explained the God experiment. That is an existential experiment anyone can do who's been listening to my lectures and has seen my theories about God and the human soul and would like to conduct an individual, private, existential experiment, changing their thinking and changing some of their behaviors to align themselves with the possibility of there being a God and seeing if it improves their life. So that's an experiment you can do to kind of verify the existence of God yourself. If you define a model of God and then align yourself, a scientific model of God, and then align yourself with what you think, live the life that you think that God would advise you to live, and do it honestly and with effort, if your life dramatically improves, that's how you know there's a God, basically. But yeah, you can't be happy to believe in a violent or vengeful God, or a God that likes to torture humans. And there are a lot of humans at the moment in very torturous circumstances. So you want to know what's going on. Why is God allowing this? Why doesn't he intervene? Okay, so understanding the Theodicy, I consider all the lectures after lectures 7 and 8 extensions of the God experiment. Further understanding of the scientific theory of God, and how to align your life with the possibility of there being a God, to see if it improves your health and your psychological health, and improves your life in general. Reduces anxiety, for example. Reduces fear of death and related anxieties. Okay. So, understanding the Theodicy, solving the Theodicy, showing that God is just, is fair, It's kind of related to the lecture that I gave on the divine ego versus the atheistic or agnostic ego. In the atheistic or agnostic ego, you think you're just going to die and be gone for eternity. Whereas if you believe in God, you think that this one life is just one of many lives, all of which are a learning experience, and this learning experience is the driving force of evolution. So one is much better than the other, one is much more optimistic. In fact, the first one is absurdly disastrous. It's so bad as it can't even be faced. Whereas the second one is joyful. So those two ways of looking at your existence will radically affect your psychology. And in the second one, in believing in God, you can actually be optimistic about your existence, and the universe isn't an enemy that's going to annihilate you forever. That's brought you into, if you're an atheist, the universe has brought you into existence, maybe by accident, but now you exist, you've got used to it, you enjoy it, you've tasted love and happiness and things like that, and the way that the universe has brought you into existence, constructed you, is such that you're going to be eternally annihilated. So then the universe kind of becomes your enemy. That makes life, it's a very difficult way to live. Okay, so those are two radically different perspectives. And then in terms of the Theodicy, in a similar way, there are two radically different perspectives to take on suffering. Okay. And God is God, or the intelligence of the universe is taking their own perspective on the suffering of the world and the suffering of humans. And their perspective is much truer, much more accurate, and it's a perspective grounded in a much more immense intelligence. So it's a more accurate way of viewing suffering on Earth. And from that perspective, the perspective of God, all this suffering is absolutely fine, absolutely fine, and absolutely acceptable, and isn't in fact a problem at all. In fact, it's a very important part of the process known as evolution. Okay. But the typical human perspective is radically different from that perspective, because we're actually down here living through and experiencing the suffering and living in this world full of suffering. And we don't have the same intelligence as God, obviously. We don't have the same the same kind of timeless perspective that God can take. We are, we are living through this suffering, and suffering is very immediate. And when you're suffering, you just want it to end and can't understand why you're suffering. But again, it boils down to whether or not what a human believes is the truth about their existence. Do they have a soul? Are they safe in the most ultimate sense? Or is this their one and only life before eternal non-existence? Because from God's perspective, no matter what happens to you now in this one particular life, in a very ultimate sense, you are totally safe, and this is just one. Like even if you're living a disastrous life now, from God's perspective, that's much less disastrous than it is for you, because from God's perspective, God, knowing the bigger plan, the bigger picture, would know that a part of evolution, when you're living many, many lives over the course of millions of years, sometimes you're going to have a bad experience, and you are going to experience a lot of suffering, because suffering is the result of a lot of experiences, or is a byproduct of a lot of experiences that produce learning. And evolution is all about learning. the species is getting more and more intelligent. We're reaching a level of intelligence now where we can actually, it's now becoming possible for us to start reducing suffering on Earth, human suffering, to zero. But to acquire that intelligence the way we've acquired that intelligence is through evolution and living many lives and learning through experience. And some of the experiences have been painful and include suffering. But God's, if you met God now and you say, why God? Why so much suffering in my life? God would reassure you that your suffering is temporary, is part of a learning and evolutionary experience, and it has a purpose. It's extremely purposeful, as in it's part of the construction of your soul, of your divine soul. Like there's a purpose to it. You are going somewhere. Like you're not suffering just to die and never exist again. You're suffering to learn and to become something more and bigger and stronger for future existence, preparing you for a future. All your present existence is a learning experience that prepares you for your future experience. And God would assure you that, yes, before long, and there's a lot of evidence for this at the moment, the human species is actually going to achieve true civilization, world peace, and freedom from poverty and discrimination and things like that. Like those are finite quantities, and they're rapidly approaching zero. So that at some point your soul will be born into a safe and happy human existence on Earth. So I think maybe the best way to explain it actually is with some concrete examples. Where we will take the human perspective on something disastrous, and then we'll take God's perspective. So me trying to explain it just theoretically might be is a bit boring and maybe ineffective as well. So I think this might be the more effective way will be for me to give human perspectives on disaster, followed by God's perspective. So let's say you get murdered. Now, from a human perspective, that's just, you're living in a dangerous city, let's say, and you get murdered just so someone can steal your phone, for example, and it's totally senseless. And it just seems, this happens to people, and it happens to people's relatives. Their lives are cut short, or their own life is cut short, and it's totally senseless, for a few dollars, let's say. And it's just awful. And it's very, very difficult for a human to reconcile themselves with that. Like how angry you would be to have your life cut short for no reason whatsoever, just because someone wanted some money. Or if it was a relative, be even worse if it's a relative, someone that you care about. It's so, people describe these things as senseless. Why? Because you can't make sense of them. And from the human perspective, you can't. Why? Well, because from the human perspective, if they're an atheist, well, then that person's one chance at existence has been cut short. They'll never get another chance to experience existence. So they've kind of lost something that is infinitely precious. Because, only occurs once, and it occurs just by chance. So if you to value it, to the person that was living the life, it was infinitely precious. So something infinitely precious has been destroyed if you're an atheist. So that's, and that's for any type of death, murder, dying from a disease or a car crash, anything like that. When someone's life is cut short, it's hard for humans to wrap their head around it. And yeah, if you're an atheist, then something infinitely precious has been destroyed for no reason. And that's, that's infinitely tragic and painful. So that's why it's so awful. And then if you're an agnostic, if you're not sure about the God issue, well, then this is probably less bad, at least you have some hope, but living with the doubt is awful as well, because the doubt is extremely fearful. Like, what if when I die, that's it, and I never exist again? And do bear in mind, your existence to you, from your perspective, which is the only perspective you can take, your existence to you is infinitely precious, because without it, you don't exist. So everything you ever have experienced or are experiencing now or ever will experience will be through your consciousness. So if it's eternally annihilated, that's an infinite loss to you. That's the loss of all existence. So that's awful. So if you're an agnostic, you've got that very large fear of that doubt with respect to death. Now, then we'll take a human with total faith in God. If you have total faith in God, then death can still be scary, because you still have to do it. It still has to happen to you, and you don't know, you still have some doubt about what the experience will be like. Whilst you know you're safe and that there is a logical, safe mechanism for a human soul dying, leaving the body and taking on another body. Once you know that, and are very glad that you know that, and feel great relief that you know that, you still don't know what the process is exactly like, because you don't remember dying in your previous lives. Why? Because the soul leaves memories behind in the brain, doesn't carry particular life memories with it. Those are written into the brain and get left behind at the point of death. So you don't remember dying. You've just experienced it a lot of times, and you will recognize the experience. What the soul doesn't have memory, but what the soul is capable of doing is recognizing experiences that it has experienced before. Whilst it can't recall them because it doesn't have memory, unless it's embedded in a human body, it can recognize them when it experiences them again. Which is how the soul navigates the world without memory, when it's detached from a human body. So you still have to go through that experience. So even if you have 100% faith in God, death is still somewhat scary, but you just know that ultimately you're safe, which is a great relief. And then you see someone get killed, someone die, and you can be like, oh my God, that's terrible. But all the while, you know that in an ultimate sense, their soul is fine and can take up human life again and continue on this human journey, which has been going now for millions of years. So it's still tragic, it's still terrible, it's still sad, but there's just an ultimate sense in which you know it's okay. If it's a loved one, that's a different issue. Then you're not being rational, so you're not going to be thinking logically like this. You're just going to be in pain, and that's a part of life. That's missing someone. That's losing someone. What you can know at least is that they are ultimately safe, and that in the future, your souls are, depending on how special your relationship was, if your relationship was extremely special, then you are going to encounter that soul again. It's just the way souls tend to group together. The souls group together like species group together. Okay. So you will, you won't see your loved one in the same physical body, but your soul will encounter your loved one's soul in a different life experience. But it'll still be your soul encountering their souls. You will just have taken on different bodies, and you'll be living different lives, and you'll have different names. But at least you'll meet them again. And there'll be some special feeling between you. And in the future, I believe that humans are going to develop the ability of determining their past life experiences. So anyway, that's for future. That's for the future of the physics of consciousness. So you can see the big difference there. So no, if a loved one is killed, you'll still be angry. You still might want to kill the person that killed them, because you won't be being rational. You'll understand that the state shouldn't kill them. And no state should kill murderers. Obviously, we have to do something with murderers, and the best we do at the moment is lock them up, which is what we're doing at the moment. That's fine, and in the future we'll probably spend more time and effort trying to rehabilitate people. So yeah, you'll still be angry if a loved one dies, or is killed, or murdered, or their life is cut short tragically. But at the very least, you'll be able to take comfort in the fact that their soul has survived, if you have total faith in God, because that's an essential part of what God is. And then there's God's perspective. God's perspective is just, God is very chill. That would be a defining characteristic of God. God's been doing this a long time and knows that it works, and has total faith in his own abilities to keep this human experiment going and keep it heading in interesting directions, which he has done till date. You can't deny that the human species is here, and it's followed a very, very interesting path to get here, and that path has involved us learning a huge amount and evolving a lot and becoming more and more moral. Those are just facts about human existence. And God has evolved the parameters, the physical parameters of himself, which is the universe, such that life, like human life, comes into existence, and God can, plays some conscious role in the ongoing evolution of humans. If it's by way of the conscious sun, which would be obviously a very immense brain, playing some role, but obviously the main role is played by us, because God values free will more than anything. So God gives us a lot of, we make all our we genuinely make all our choices ourselves, which is that's essential to God. It would be immoral of God to determine any of our decisions before we make them, because God values free will, because that's what makes life meaningful. So our free will means that we can cause a lot of suffering down here within certain boundaries. God won't let us. Well, it's obvious from the world around us that we can freely choose to be greedy and cruel and destroy the planet, and we are free to do things like that. God is hoping that the suffering involved in behaving like that will lead us to turn in another direction, and that direction is towards God and genuine Christianity between people. That is not everyone becoming Christians, but everyone, whatever your religion is, atheist or Christian or Jew or Muslim or whatever, treating one another in the way that Jesus suggested that people should treat each other, which just means peace, love, forgiveness, tolerance, and things like that, and generosity, sharing, taking care of the sick and the needy. Those are just the essential things, the essential rules of true human civilization. Like, we don't have true human civilization yet, because then, poor Americans would have healthcare, and people in Flint, Michigan would have clean water, because the government isn't Christian. The government is an oligarchy that cares more about profit than the suffering of poor people, which is obviously very wrong. So God is hoping that we will turn away from such obviously wrong ways of behaving, and that we will learn to turn away by becoming conscious of the suffering that it causes. So that is how God justifies suffering. It's educative. Is that right? Educated. No, fucking hell. Educative. Whatever. Oh, my mouth is so dry, So, yeah, that's how God justifies suffering. Because think about what suffering is. Suffering is behaving in some particular way that changes your conscious state, changes your physical and conscious state, configuration, and it changes it such that it's unpleasant. And then happiness is where you do something, change your physical configuration, or, in other words, choose to do something that makes you happy. And choosing to live in this awful, absurdly greedy way is making us obviously very sad and unwell. That's why, mental health problems rates of mental health problems are skyrocketing, and people are on drugs, and the whole deal, the whole awful world that we see around us. So yeah, before long, this suffering will cause us to look within and start choosing the spiritual, the moral way forward, and changing our country, changing our countries and our politics to align with obvious obvious morality, common sense morality, which is a country as rich as America should, there's so much wealth there that people shouldn't be going without basic medication. That's very obvious from a moral point of view. Anyway, I have another lecture called A Logical Proof of God, where I explain the changes that are about to take place in society. So listen to that if you'd like to hear more about how society will become a more moral entity. Okay. So yeah, that's what suffering is. It's always temporary. Your soul is always safe. If your body comes into is very dramatically damaged, your soul just deconnects from it via wave particle duality, because it's a very special quantum molecule that's taken millions of years to evolve. So your soul is always safe. So pain and suffering are just temporary. And suffering is educative. It's the guiding it's like a guidance system for evolution. If we do things that cause suffering, eventually we turn away from doing them, and we consider new possibilities. And the more moral the possibilities are, the happier they make us if we actually choose them. So humanity actually has to choose spirituality and morality. Choose that instead of choosing money and shoes and all the other crap. Okay, so that's basically how God justifies suffering. So this can help you kind of take a more relaxed attitude to maybe some of the more disastrous aspects of your life. Like if you're maybe, like for me, what caused me most suffering throughout my life has been like my romantic relationships, I suppose. So like, let's apply it to, I wanted to talk about that as well, sorry. Yeah, like if you're going through a breakup and it's really awful, at least now you can know, okay, fine, my dreams of true love didn't quite work out this time, but it's not the end of the world. Even if it doesn't work out in this life, I still will have learned a lot throughout this life, and it will happen for me someday, even if that is in another life, as opposed to thinking, oh my God, my love life isn't going to work out, and then I'm just going to get old and die and be gone for eternity, which is a lot worse. But then I wanted to give you an example of how ideas of the soul even make things like Alzheimer's disease much less terrible. So for example, my grandmother died of Alzheimer's disease, and that was before I believed in God. But I wasn't too close to her, because I'd moved away from her. I was close to her, and then at the age of 11 I moved to a different country, and then she didn't die until I was, I don't know, I can't remember exactly, maybe I hadn't seen her for more than a decade. I was 27 or 28 or something when she died. But it's such an awful thing to witness, because I'd see her about once a year, and her memory would go, and the whole Alzheimer's thing. And before long, she was totally gone, alive, breathing, eating, but totally gone. She would sometimes smile at the sound of my granddad's voice, because they'd been together their whole lives. Beautiful love story. She would sometimes smile at the sound of his voice, but that was it. Apart from that, she was gone. And that seems so, I didn't believe in God then. And from an atheistic perspective, it's just like, wow. It really doesn't get much worse than that, She didn't know it was happening to her. And then, really awful for my granddad because he had to watch her go like that, which was very sad for him. Difficult, and if that was just the end of her existence, I mean, it's almost too terrible to contemplate. Whereas if she has a soul, then it becomes it's a very different matter. And this is why I'm so much more optimistic about such things. Even though it was still sad, even though it was still painful, ultimately it's okay, because she had a soul, a physical soul, made out of energy and particles, embedded within her body, somewhere within the central nervous system. And the soul uses the brain that surrounds it, the physical brain, as a tool to think things and imagine things and to have conscious communication with the surrounding universe via the eyes and the ears and things. And as a tool for thinking and having ideas and imagining things. The soul uses the brain by way of choice. Like, your mind is a machine that offers up ideas, and then you choose to engage with them or not by giving them your conscious attention. But giving them your conscious attention is a conscious choice, a very natural, intuitive conscious choice that you make, and it's non-verbal. It's just intuitive. But your brain throws up ideas, and you choose to engage with them, and then you choose different possibilities and guide your thoughts in such a way, using your brain as a conscious tool. It's a conscious mechanism, like a human uses a computer. Okay, that's a very loose analogy. But the brain surrounds the soul, which is in the central nervous system somewhere, and the soul uses the brain as a tool of existence, a tool of thinking, and the soul doesn't make all the decisions. A lot of the decisions are made by the body itself, which is a conscious thing as well. Such as, beating your heart. Your soul doesn't have anything to do with that. Your body takes care of that. And your breathing, your body normally takes care of your breathing without you having to consciously worry about it. But here's the thing, your soul can take over control of your breathing, proving your free will. At any time you can stop your breath and hold your breath. Proving your free will and proving that your soul is the chief conscious controller of your body. Okay. So then what happens with Alzheimer's? Well, then all that happens with Alzheimer's is the brain is a living conscious thing, and something goes wrong, and the conscious machine stops functioning the way it should. It gets clogged up with what's called neuritic plaque, which is where proteins within the brain, they fold the wrong way, and these misfolded proteins clog up the brain. And it's just like, it's like spilling treacle. It's like spilling treacle on your laptop. The treacle gets into the workings of the computer and mucks up the works, and it stops working, or it starts malfunctioning and ultimately stops working. That's what happens with an Alzheimer's brain, but it's with neuritic plaque, which is some genetic. I don't know what the origin of Alzheimer's is, to be honest, but it's to do with genetics and ways of living, how you use your brain. I think your brain just starts certain organic processes that are deleterious to the normal human functioning of the brain, and then it starts malfunctioning around the soul. So then the soul tries to use the memory centers of the brain and can't. It can't use them because they're clogged up. The memories have been destroyed, the memory centers of the brain have been compromised. Their configuration has been changed, such that it includes neuritic plaque, which prevents the normal functioning of the memory, and therefore a person with Alzheimer's loses their memory slowly but surely as the neuritic plaque, grows. And then ultimately they lose all, most of their cognitive abilities and functions. And basically they're a soul just trapped in a very blind body. So I mean, they can still see, but it's just bare visual experience. It doesn't create any sort of, It doesn't fire off any memories or cause any thinking processes because the brain isn't capable of those things anymore. So you'll see someone in late stage Alzheimer's, they're living in a constant moment. They're not thinking, they're not processing things. When they look at anything, it doesn't stir any memories because their memories have been destroyed. The brain is just clogged up, so they're just living in one constant moment where they can be more or less happy, depending on whether they're hungry, comfortable, and things like that. And now that is very sad, but at least it's not eternally sad. Their soul will have learnt from their whole life's experience before they got Alzheimer's and had all those experiences, and it still will have been a worthwhile living experience. And then eventually their body will fail and their soul will disconnect from that body and will be freed from the malfunctioning brain and will connect to a new fetus and begin a human life. And you see how in an ultimate, like, that's still terrible, it's still a tragedy for the people to go through. I'm not trying to say that, we've got to be realistic, take life as it actually is, and, be brave enough to admit that it involves some tragedy. But at least in the most ultimate sense, it's all good. So maybe, hopefully, ideas like this can help people, because this is all purely scientific, and it's, check out my Physics of Consciousness, because it's all, my principles of the physics of consciousness are the only principles that make sense of all of modern neuroscience. And they do so very simply and logically, and if anyone from the age of, I would say, 10 upwards can learn them and start applying them to the world around them. Okay, so that's how God justifies all the suffering in the world, and hopefully maybe that might make you feel a little bit better about some of your hardships, and maybe put them into a more positive perspective for you. So that's the Theodicy. So thanks for listening. All the best. Take care.